Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Is Business Certification Right for You? I'm Rebecca Chauncey, a business advisor here at the Illinois Small Business Development Center, or SBDC, at Build Bronzeville. So pleased to have you join us today, and I'm excited to introduce you to today's presenter. Before I do so, let me remind you that this session is brought to you at no cost because it's funded in part through a cooperative agreement with the US SBA, or the United States Small Business Administration, the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, and the Urban Juncture Foundation. Couple of housekeeping notes. If you have questions today, please be sure to type them in the Q&A section, which you will see at the bottom of your screen. If you move your mouse or hover at the bottom of the screen, you'll see Q&A. Type your questions there. If relevant in the moment, we will address them. And there will also be time at the end of the presentation to discuss additional questions. And also be sure, if you didn't already prepare, have something to take great notes with. This is information packed and you don't want to miss a bit of it. And so let me introduce you to today's presenter. Maura Downs is the Managing Director of Government Contracting Program and Services at the WBDC. In this role, Maura oversees the WBDC's APEX Accelerator, as well as the WBDC Small Business Transportation Resource Center. She has over a decade of experience counseling small businesses on obtaining diverse business certifications, leveraging those certifications for government contracts and all aspects of government contracting. She is a subject matter expert on certification, including the DBE program and local MBE and WBE program. Without further ado, I will pass the mic on, if you will, to Maura.
Perfect. Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you to Rebecca and Build Bronzeville for hosting me today and for all of you for joining. Like Rebecca said, I am with the Women's Business Development Center, and I head up our government contracting group. I'm here today to talk to you about certification. This is something that I've been working, a world I've been working in for, almost 14 years now. So I do know the ins and outs of certification. I'm happy to talk to you about certification for your company. It's a smaller group today, so I'm happy to take questions. You can put them in the chat. Rebecca will chime in and read them to me. It makes it a little bit more interesting to me if you guys put in questions rather than me just shouting into the computer. I give this talk all the time, so I love hearing from you guys and hearing what you're thinking about. So with that said, I will get started. So a little bit about the Women's Business Development Center. We are a nonprofit organization. We have a mission to support the growth of small businesses. We are not limited to just supporting women-owned businesses. We support any small business, so minority-owned, women-owned, veteran-owned. Those are kind of our focuses, but any small business, we will help support you in our growth. In my group, focuses specifically on growing small businesses through government contracting. We do this through a grant we receive from the state of Illinois. We are an APEX Accelerator, and all of our services are provided at no cost. We provide a variety of services, including helping you get your company certified, but we will help you kind of win contracts, build your knowledge, do all of the things that you need to do to grow your business through government contracting. Our goal is to create economic impact through growing your business, getting new contracts, getting you to hire more people, and hire more people and grow your business in your community. The services that we provide include market research, registrations like registering with the city of Chicago or with SAM.gov, finding partners, preparing a bid response, understanding kind of the requirements that go into government contracts, and then, of course, certification, which is what we are here to talk about today. So we'll finally dive into, is certification right for me? So we're going to talk today about minority, women-owned, veteran-owned businesses and those related certifications. I kind of talk about them using catch-all terms like diverse businesses, but just keep in mind that what I mean is kind of all of these certifications generally. People get confused with MBE and WBE and all the acronyms. So we'll go through all of that, but I'm going to talk very generally and high level, and then we can kind of get into specifics at the end. So the first question that you need to ask, and I can't encourage you enough to think about this question before you dive into an application, is certification going to actually help my business? I can't tell you how many times I've worked with clients over the years who have this certification and then they're so mad because they put all this energy into getting it and they haven't gotten any work out of it. So before you put all the energy into putting an application together, make sure that you understand how you're going to use this certification to grow your business. So I kind of divided the types. So when I meet with a client to discuss if certification is right for them, the first question I ask is, are you looking to do work in the public sector or the private sector? So public sector work is doing work with a government agency, like the state of Illinois, the city of Chicago, smaller government agencies like the Chicago Park District, or lesser known agencies like the Public Building Commission. There's lots of government agencies out there. And then also there are lots of government agencies who are hiring large companies who need subcontractors. So if you're interested in working as a subcontractor, this one we often think about construction industries. So HVAC contractors and plumbers who help build buildings for general contractors. But there's also a variety of different ways you can work with a government agency as a subcontractor. So those are the public sector areas that you can work. And in these contexts, certification is a no-brainer. There's definitely a way you can put a certification to work for you. It's just a matter of knowing which one is right for the government agency that you're interested in working for. But definitely a slam dunk certification, no-brainer. So on this public sector side, certification makes a lot of sense. In the private sector, it's a little bit different. So in the private sector, there aren't large private companies increasingly have goals for working with women and minority-owned companies. So there's a lot of value in having certification if you're trying to work with a large private company. So think Boeing, Caterpillar, Walgreens, those type of companies. They all have internal goals that they're trying to meet. So certification makes a lot of sense if that's your target client. If you're interested in working with a smaller private company, certification still could be relevant. They might not have a formal policy, but they might have kind of internally talked about, oh, we want to work with more diverse companies. So it's a marketing tool in that way. So in those two contexts, it makes sense. One area where certification doesn't make a ton of sense, and there's exceptions to every rule here, but if your client is individuals, so you're a retailer, maybe you have a clothing boutique, or a barber shop or a hair salon, those kind of businesses, certification doesn't make a ton of sense because the individuals who are buying your products or services, they don't need a specific government certification or a certain, a certain logo on anything. They're okay if you just write on your website, we're a women and minority owned restaurant. That's good enough for individuals, and that may or may not sway them, but you don't need a specific certification. So anything if your client is just people, so individuals off the street, certification makes less sense. But I mean, like I said, there's exceptions to every rule. So if you have a restaurant, but maybe you do some catering, it still might make sense in some contexts. So just make sure you're thinking through, how am I actually going to use this certification before diving in? And other things to consider as you decide if certification is right for you. Capacity is the number one thing that I, second to, is this certification going to be useful? The next thing is, do I have the capacity? So if you are, and again, there's exceptions to every rule, but if you're a one-man band, you're just starting out, you don't have a lot of past contracting history, it's going to be hard to put that certification to work until you're a more robust company. My area, of course, is government. So I always say that government is extremely risk adverse. So they don't like to take a gamble on a brand new company. They like to see some work history. They like to see a couple of employees. They don't like the idea that if they're hiring a one-man band, that person, God forbid something happens to them or to a family member, they now have a contract that isn't getting fulfilled. So that's too risky for government. So they want to make sure that that you have a bench, that you have some past history. And so if that's what you need in order to get the government contract. So if you can't get a government contract because you don't have the capacity, the certification isn't that useful. So that's just something to think about. You want to make sure that you grow your business a little bit before you jump in and get certified.
Quick,
Next is,
sorry, Maura, quick
oh,
question.
yeah, please.
Is there an ideal time, you would say, for a business owner to um, consider certification if you said they're more robust? So
Yeah,
I know that can vary, but
it
generally
definitely,
speaking, can you give us an idea of what that
sure,
might look like?
sure.
Thanks.
So again, it varies wildly by industry, but I would say 2 to 3 employees besides yourself, and at least 500,000 in revenue before you start thinking about a government certification. And that's kind of high. I mean, if you have $300,000 in revenue, but those are the things we're talking about. It's not number of years in business, which everyone wants me to tell them, how many years do I need to be in business before I can apply? And that's, there's no answer to that. It's really, how many employees do you have and what's your revenue level? Those are the things that we look at in terms of potential success. And there is no magic number, but that gives you kind of an idea.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. And keep asking good questions like that. I'm happy to answer them. Um, Okay, so moving on. So disclosure is something else to think about. You have to disclose a lot of information about your business, and you have to have all of your paperwork in order, which I know from doing this for a long time that small businesses don't always have all of their paperwork kind of properly organized. You need to have your tax returns filed and, financial statements and things like that need to be in place and readily available to share. And then sometimes you have to turn over personal tax returns and sometimes even a personal net worth statement. So you need to be willing to share information about yourself with a government agency and being comfortable doing that. So make sure that you're comfortable with that. And then another really important thing to remember is that certification is not a guarantee that you'll get any sort of contract. A certification is just one step in the process. We get a lot of phone calls over here about, I have this certification and nobody has called me to give me a contract. And it's like, that's not how it works. You got to go out and get that contract. And this is really just a marketing tool in your toolbox that you can have to sweeten the deal, if you will, when you're marketing your company to potential partners or to government agencies. And then the last item on here is kind of what I talked about on the last slide. You need to make sure that your certification is going to actually persuade somebody to hire you. Again, if you're a business that's marketing your services to individuals who don't necessarily care about a certification, the certification just isn't that useful. So you need to make sure you understand how this certification is going to position you for success. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to take a sip of water. We're going to talk about the certification requirements. So if you guys have decided, okay, yes, I think my business is, robust enough to go and get a certification, and I know all of the requirement, or understand how I'm going to use this certification to get my business to grow. Let's talk about what you need to do to get the actual certification. So these are the 4 areas that get scrutinized when you are applying for the certification. The first 3, ownership, control, and independence, are pretty much standard across any certification. There's a variety, which I will talk about at the end, but these are kind of standard tenets of certification. And then some certifications, especially government ones, bring in the 4th item on this list, which is economic disadvantage, which means that you have to be a small business and an individual that is economically disadvantaged in addition to being socially disadvantaged. So that means you're not just a minority, but you're a minority or a woman with a personal net worth under a certain limit. And I'll talk more about what that means in a moment. But first, I'll talk about ownership. So this is the most commonly thought of requirement for certification. Certification has to be at least 51% owned by a qualifying individual. So a woman, a minority, a person with a disability, a veteran. They need to own that company, and they can't just own it on paper. They need to truly observe and receive the benefits of the ownership. So they will closely scrutinize your corporate documents and your tax return to make sure that you are truly the owner, and not just, somebody filled out the application and put somebody down as the owner. You have to really have that ownership and hold it. And they will scrutinize the money that you contributed to start the company to make sure that you meet that ownership qualification. But if you are someone who owns 100% of your company, you started it independently, you won't have any issues establishing that you truly own your company. This happens in situations where there's maybe multiple owners or a long history of ownership. The company's been around for several generations. Then it gets a little bit trickier, but for most of you, this will not be an issue. So in addition to owning 51% of the company, the disadvantaged individual needs to also control that company. And control is a little bit more complicated to establish. But again, if you are the sole owner or you own the company with another socially disadvantaged individual, you won't have any trouble establishing this. They will look at 2 different types of control: managerial control and operational control. Managerial control is just that you actually have the power to control the company, and that power has been granted to you by the company's corporate documents. So they'll look to make sure that you are the president of the company, or that you hold the highest office, that the operating agreement or the bylaws allow you to control any votes on matters related to the company's operations. Which again, if you own 100% of the company, not a concern. If there's multiple owners who all get votes, it gets trickier. But hopefully that's not the case for any of you. And then operational control is also closely scrutinized. And in the application, when they start asking you for documents and you're like, why are they asking me for this? They're looking to see that you are able to, that you are the one signing documents. They'll look at things like leases and loans, and they want to see that your name is the one on there and not some other random person. They will look at the resume of the qualifying owner and make sure that that person has the technical expertise to control a company in that specific area. So they'll look to make sure that if you own a HVAC company, you should have industry experience in HVAC. You shouldn't, if somebody comes and owns a HVAC company with a bunch of employees who are doing HVAC work and their resume shows that they worked, they were a teacher for the last 20 years, they're going to be like, well, how do you have the experience to run this type of company? And sometimes that can be explained, and sometimes it doesn't make any sense. So something like, oh, well, I was a teacher for 20 years, but my dad owned an HVAC company and I worked there on the weekends and during the summers, that kind of thing. So those are some details that you can include in your application to kind of tell the whole story of how you have the expertise to run this type of company. And then lastly, you need to have final decision-making authority in key management areas. And that means things like hiring and firing, making major financial decisions, all of the things that go into running a company. You can delegate that authority to someone else, but you need to, at the end of the day, retain that final decision-making authority, and not rely on someone else to do that because you don't have the capacity to do it. Okay. So independence. This one is a little bit tricky. Again, for most companies, this does not come up, but I just like to mention it so that you, again, understand why they're asking for some of these documents that they ask for in the application. They will ask for, so independence means that your company is able to operate independently from any other company. Where this gets tricky is nobody starts a business in a vacuum. Everyone gets a little bit of help from somewhere. So you had to work somewhere else to get the experience before you started this company. You need to get a contract from somebody. You need to get a loan from somewhere. The problem becomes if you worked at a company and got all of your experience at that company, and then you left, and then you got a contract with that company that you used to work at, and they gave you a loan, and they gave you a vehicle to use, and they gave you a couple of employees. Once you start layering those things on, that becomes an independence issue, because you're too dependent on that company for the things that they provided to you, and you're not really operating with, you're not able to operate without that company. So they do scrutinize that. But again, for most people, this does not come up as an issue. But you can imagine that, a company might just take, they have a socially disadvantaged individual who works for them. They're like, just go start a minority-owned company over here. We'll do everything for you. And then you can just be our MBE. Well, that company is not really what we want to see as a minority-owned company. That's not a true, a true operation. That's a subsidiary of the bigger company. So that's what they're looking out for. Okay, and last, government certifications. Some have requirements for economic disadvantage. So there's two different ways that they can test this economic disadvantage. They want to make sure that you're a small business. The Small Business Administration puts out a list of size standards for each business based on your NAICS code. That's the NAICS code, North American Industrial Classification System. So they define businesses in terms of gross receipts for the most part. Sometimes it's employees, and that's how they know if you're a small business or not. These limits are millions of dollars in annual gross receipts. So not something that most small businesses need to worry about right away, but just something to keep in the back of your mind that there is a limit there. And then the personal net worth limit comes up in from time to time in government certification. Those limits are, again, over $1 million in personal net worth. And there's a lot of exceptions for things like you don't include the value of your personal residence. You don't include the value of the applicant firm. You take discounts for your retirement accounts. So most people, this is not an issue. And then other certifications, they look at your adjusted gross income and they have limits there, which is a line on your personal tax return that you can look at, and then also your total assets. But those last two, adjusted gross income and total assets, are more in federal certification. So I don't like to get too far into those. Okay, so let's talk about the types of certifications. This is something, I get a lot of people who come to me and say, oh, I'm a WBE. And I say, okay, from where? Who gave you the WBE? And they say, I don't know. I'm a WBE. What does it matter? It matters quite a bit. So let's talk about the different types. So there's kind of a couple different levels, and I'm speaking specifically about certifications here in Chicago and Illinois. Certifications are different throughout the entire country, and they all have different rules. So a common misunderstanding is that federal certification means that you are, it's like a national certification accepted everywhere by every government. And unfortunately, that is just not the case. Federal certification is for doing business with the federal government itself. And then it's not always recognized in government apart from that context of federal contracting. So something to think about before you go and get one of those federal certifications is that it's really for working with the federal government. And I like to call the federal government like the big leagues. Usually you got to work your way up to the minor leagues, and by that I mean state and local contracting before you can get to the big leagues. And of course, just like in baseball, there's, that one of a kind or very rare circumstance where somebody goes right to the big leagues, but that's definitely not the norms. Usually you work your way up to that because the federal government likes to see a lot of contracting history and higher revenue, higher number of employees before they'll be interested in working with you. So then you have state and local, which for us is City of Chicago and Cook County, and the state of Illinois. So City of Chicago, Cook County, and the state of Illinois each have their own certifications. The City of Chicago and Cook County have direct reciprocity with each other. So you go to either one of those and it will be accepted at the City of Chicago and Cook County and all of their sister agencies. So think about the Cook County jail system, the City of Chicago Park District, Chicago City Colleges, CPS, all of those kind of smaller sister agencies. City of Chicago and Cook County don't recognize any other certification. So if you have that federal certification, or if you have the state of Illinois certification, they don't care. They just want their own certification. So you need to just be aware. This is what I talk about when, people go and get a certification. They have no idea what it can be used for. And I don't blame them because it's obviously highly confusing. But then they get this certification and they put all this work in and it's not something they're actually going to use. Same with the state of Illinois. That certification is really used for doing work with the state of Illinois or any of its smaller sister agencies like the Capital Development Board, which is the state agency that builds all of the state's buildings. They have their own certification that you can get. And what I like to recommend is that they have a short form process that you can take part in. So if you have another certification, You can use that certification to just complete a really short application, and then they'll certify you in about 10 business days, which is really nice. So I always suggest don't apply to the state of Illinois with a full application, just take part in this short form application. Last on this list is I have two acronyms, WBANK and CMSDC. So WBANK is a national organization that certifies women-owned businesses. That certification is recognized in all 50 states, but it's administered locally. My organization, the WBDC, administers that certification. So we have a department here that I am not part of that certifies companies as WBEs. The certification is good for doing work in the private sector, like we talked about at the beginning of this presentation. So the WBENC and the CMSDC both certify for doing work in the private sector. So if your target client is not a government agency, you're really just trying to work in the private sector, you have a product that you want to sell at Target or Walgreens or Walmart, this is an awesome certification to have. But it's not that great for doing work in the government realm. So WBANK certifies women-owned businesses, and then the CMSDC is part of the National Minority Supplier Development Council, which certifies companies as minority-owned businesses. I know this is all probably sounding like Greek to you guys, so I'm happy to guide anyone through all of this if you are interested in learning more. This little chart I just show you to help you understand. This is something I keep on my desktop and look at frequently so that when I get questions about the size limit or the personal net worth limit, I can keep it straight because I can't remember all of this. But what I encourage you to notice is that we have this column called the certification accepted by. So when you go to get this certification, that's what you really need to focus on is who is going to accept this certification. And if the agency that you're targeting as your client is not accepting that certification, don't get that certification. That's the key here. Make sure that this certification is going to work for you and help you get those good contract dollars. This next slide are the federal certifications that I don't want to get too far into, but just know that there are a lot of certifications that the federal government offers. Actually, all of them now are administered through the Small Business Administration. But two of them on here, if you read really closely, you can self-certify through registering in sam.gov. So I think that's a really nice option. That's for small disadvantaged businesses and small businesses. So when people come to me and they're just jonesing to have a federal certification, that is where I send them, or that's what I let them know. Like you can register in sam.gov. It's just a registration and you can self-certify as these designations. Okay, and then last on here, I have the certification for the private sector. So these are the two organizations I talked about, WBANK and the CMSDC. You can note that these two do not have size limits or personal net worth limits. So oftentimes companies who are very large or very wealthy individuals own the companies. They love these certifications because they do not limit that. These are good. Again, they're good for doing work with Fortune 500 companies, and then they're accepted in some government contexts, but make sure you're aware of that. But these are really good for doing business with the private sector.
Quick question, Maura.
Yeah.
The question is, can someone work with someone like you for hand-holding when starting?
Yes. So yes, and Rebecca, you're going to pop the link in at the end, but I will give you my contact information. As an APEX Accelerator, we will we meet with you, can meet with you one-on-one and kind of guide you through the process and help you come up with a certification strategy. And yeah, we will hold your hand. Most people, I can meet with them for an hour, kind of give them some guidance, and they can do it on their own. But other people want a little bit more in-depth help, happy to do that. So absolutely. And then Rebecca will give you that link to make an appointment at the end of the presentation.
I just actually dropped it in the
Oh, you
chat.
did? Okay,
So
great.
that's
Perfect.
just for everyone. You should be able to see that, everyone, but you should still type your questions in the Q&A section,
Yes.
which we appreciate. Thank you.
And you can make an appointment with either me or my colleague Donna. She's also able to assist you. Okay, so a little bit about the process, because this is one of the main questions that I get asked is, how long is this going to take? That's it. How long is this going to take and how much does it cost tend to be the most commonly asked questions. So the answer to that is this first part, the preparation and submission of the application, that's all on you. So a lot of it has to do with how organized you are, how long your business has been around. If you have a long history, like, like I mentioned earlier, if you have a multi-generational ownership situation where, maybe your grandfather started the company and it's been passed down, that's going to take you a little bit longer because you got to figure out, where are all these stock certificates? Where's all this stuff? If you started the company last year, you're an LLC, you're the only owner, you could get that application together probably in a couple hours, get all the documents together, and then submit the application in another 2 hours, I'd say, and upload that and be done with it. So it really depends on you. But I always recommend starting with gathering all the documents first. Everybody, and I don't fault you if you do this, but everybody gets on the website, they fill out the application, so they're all excited that they're going to get this certification, and then they go to that document list, which is in the back always, and they get, oh, I don't have my tax return. Oh, I don't know where my bank signature card is. I don't even know what that is. And then that's where they get slowed down, and then they don't ever submit the application. So start with that document list first, gather all your documents, and then start the application. Almost all certifications now are done online, which is really nice. And I am happy, something I can do very easily if you want to set up a one-on-one application is and this is kind of how I prefer to do it, put the whole application together, get it as far as you can, and then make an appointment with me and I can go through and answer any questions you have or troubleshoot anything, and kind of just spot check it before you put it in to avoid any hiccups during the review process. So once you file that, the agency accepts the application and then they kind of put it into a queue for review. So that typically takes, a month, let's say, before they pick it up. And then they will ask you several rounds of questions. Usually it's 2 or 3 rounds, and then they do a site visit. The site visits pre-pandemic were always done in person. Now a lot of them are done virtually. Sometimes they're even just done on the phone, but the site visit isn't something that should make you nervous. The site visit is really just to make sure that you can answer basic questions about the company. They don't know anything about your industry typically. These certification reviewers are people who are experts in certification and not in your industry. So they're not asking you really factual questions. It's more like, does this person present themselves as a business owner is what they're testing for. So that whole part of the process where you've submitted your application and it's reviewed should take about 90 days in a perfect world. Most certifications say it takes 90 days. The city of Chicago, I know right now, is running about a little over 120 days to review their review applications, which isn't bad. But keep in mind that's an average. So some certifications go through really quick. And then other ones, I've heard horror stories. Sometimes if you have a very complex situation, it can take, 9 months to a year. So that I say that not to scare you, but to encourage you to put together a well-organized, thoughtful application so that it can go through very quickly. Once the review process is completed, there's most agencies have a board that reviews and approves the certification, and then they, get signed off on and approved, and you get a decision letter letting you know that you've been approved. So once you have this approved certification, you are now ready to go out and market yourself as a certified business and start getting contracts. A commonly asked question is about, what if I get denied? There is always an appeal process. But if you think that it's going south and you think you might be facing a denial, please give me a call or set up an appointment because, sometimes there's ways we can help you mitigate that, or maybe we figured out you just don't qualify for that certification for whatever reason. It might be a good idea to just withdraw the certification rather than go through a denial and have to consider putting in an appeal. Okay, let's see. That is it for me. I have down here my phone number, my scheduling link, and our address. But I also have over here, my email address is mdowns@wbdc.org. Feel free to email me. That's my phone number and my direct line. So I'm happy to meet with you individually if you guys are really interested in certification and have more questions that you would like to ask. But I'm also happy to take questions now that you didn't get a chance to ask during the presentation.
Thanks so much, Maura. So we have another question.
Sure.
Can you clarify, if you get WBE, will it cover the city and state as well?
So no. Short answer is no. Long answer is it depends on what you mean by WBE. Who gave you the WBE? Typically, people are asking if they get certified by our organization, the WBDC, will the city and the state accept it? And they will not. The city wants their own City of Chicago certification or the Cook County certification. The state wants their own State of Illinois certification, unfortunately. But if you get WBE certified with the state of Illinois, they will accept your WBE certification at the state of Illinois. They will not take your state of Illinois certification at the city of Chicago because there are different regulations, which is, I don't know, very complicated, very complicated issue, but good question.
Thank you. Any other questions before we close for the day? I know this has been so insightful, and hopefully you now really understand there is
A lot
more
that goes
than
into it.
one certification, right? And so when people say, I just want to be MBE certified, and as Maura has explained, from which entity, right?
Yeah, from where?
From where? You have to
Yeah.
ask yourself that. So any final questions before we close? If needed, if you're not able to type for some reason, you can raise your hand and I will give you the ability to say your question aloud. But otherwise, okay, it looks like we've covered everything. So if you haven't, okay. Oh, you're welcome. So if you haven't already connected with us at the Illinois SBDC at Build Bronzeville for advising, you are welcome to connect with us via the phone number that was listed, the email, and on the website. Ultimately, you'll need to sign up to become a client on the website. And know that you've already received, if you look in the chat, you see those links to connect with Maura or her colleague Donna If you have questions specifically related to business certification, you can reach out to either one of them. You will receive today's recording as a part of a follow-up survey email. Please complete the survey because it allows us to get insight from you so we can provide you with the best training to ensure you continue to excel in your business. And I want to say that's it. Many thanks to Maura again for a very engaging and always so interesting presentation about all the things related to business certification. We appreciate your time and attention, everyone, and continue to have a wonderful day and rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you.